6:30. Welcome, everyone. And as I normally start out with, we are recording this meeting. So for those of you that are new, I'm Megan Tuttle, president for NEA New Hampshire. We did take a week off last week, which was kind of weird. I have to admit, it was a little odd. I did get a few texts wondering if we were still going to have the talk on Tuesday night. And I said, no, we're taking 1 week off and we're back this week. So I'm glad everybody could join us again. We are recording this just as a reminder, and you can find any of our previous Tuttle Talks on our website, so you can always go back and listen to them. We don't have any national people with us tonight. We have some other really important people, though. We have Brian Hawkins with us, who's the GR director for NEA New Hampshire. So he's actually going to be talking a lot about what's going on in New Hampshire. But before we get to that, just a couple things. If you didn't listen to any news today, just a reminder, Trump thinks that we must open schools. We have to go back to schools. The parents want it, the moms want it, the dads want it, and the kids want it, according to him and Betsy DeVos. The piece that's missing there is the educators. Nothing about whether or not educators want to go back. Nothing about whether we feel safe going back. Nothing about the fact that a lot of educators are parents, they are moms, they are dads, they have kids in school. So that whole piece was missing, and that's pretty disturbing on a lot of levels. So yeah, just that in itself, you know, our national NEA issued a statement about it. Lily Eskelsen-Garcia, the president, basically said, you know, neither Trump nor Betsy DeVos they don't have any credibility when it comes to education. So we're going to be releasing our own statement tomorrow from NEA New Hampshire. And he still is going against all the, you know, Dr. Fauci, the epidemiologist, everybody. So that's, you know, that was the latest when I was just watching some CNN before this. Just something else to kind of keep in mind, and then we'll start getting into this for tonight. But, you know, the government has given billions and billions and billions to corporations, right, to bail them out when they were in trouble, whether it was during the recession or it was during the coronavirus right now. They gave billions to these corporations. The problem that we're seeing is they haven't been giving billions to education. Where our kids' education, that's the investment in the future. And we did get one round of the CARES money, right? But even our own state commissioner decided that he had to withhold some of the money in case private schools needed it. He had to withhold some of the money until Betsy DeVos said, yes, you can give it to private schools because they needed it. That's not what it was meant for. So now we have the second round of money coming through in the HEROES Act. It made it through the House. It's being held up in the Senate. And that would give you even more money. That would give money to schools to help replace and update things as the HVAC systems. Because as much as we can talk about the PPE, going back to school, wearing masks, protective gear, all that sort of thing, what about the HVAC systems? How many of you embed in classrooms that are stifling 93 degrees, no air circulation? I mean, if you have an air conditioner in your classroom, God bless you. If you work in an office with an air conditioner, God bless you. Don't you love when you go up to the copy room or something and there's a sign that says, please keep door closed, air conditioning's on? I've never made so many copies in my life, you know, between September, October, and June, when it's about 93 degrees in my classroom, because that's the coolest place to be. I'll make one copy. Oops, got to go down and make another. Sorry, there's a line. Oh, that's too bad. I'll wait. It's the busiest place to be. The HVAC systems, how old are our schools? I mean, honestly, if you think about it, most schools in New Hampshire are extremely old. When was the last time the HVAC systems were actually kept up to date? Because what happens in New Hampshire when education funding money gets cut? We get cut for school improvements. Those are all the things that come from the state, right? So those are the things that are getting cut. So, you know, I think the message of we need the proper PPE is out there. I truly do. That's, I think, been very clearly heard. What hasn't been talked about too much, and I think this has to be something that we really start pushing, is we need money from the federal government to update our schools. We need that HEROES Act money. We need it to get, you know, the HVAC systems, the air quality. We had a bill going through last year on air quality, and then everything kind of stalled this year. So just a couple things, because we don't have enough to worry about in our brains right now, besides the anxiety of not knowing what it's going to look like to go back in the fall. So one other quick update before we get started with Brian. 2 weeks ago when we last met, I said that we were launching a survey, and we got the results back. We had over 2,000 responses, which is great. It's about 25% of our membership, but I think for us to put out a survey and get responses within, 4 days, this is an amazing, amazing thing. So without a vaccine or effective treatment options for COVID-19, how comfortable are you returning to the classroom? 28% were very uncomfortable. 22% were, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with it. 26 were neutral. So a good majority of educators that answered this said they were not comfortable basically going back without those things being, without the options for the effective treatment. How concerned are you about your health and safety if schools were to reopen for in-person instruction this fall? 36% were number 5, very concerned. 24% were at 4. And 20% were kind of neutral. So again, it's pretty much, high numbers saying that people are not concerned about your own health and safety. 82% of educators out of 2,400 responses are willing to wear a mask. 2,400 responses again, how concerned are you about your students' health and safety? 45% were very concerned, 26%, and then 18 were neutral. So again, that's still high percentages for educators being concerned. This was kind of half and half. Do you think social distancing, screening, smaller class sizes, and staggered schedules are enough to allow public schools to safely reopen? 51% said no, and 48% said yes. So that's kind of half and half. I think a lot of that depends on what age level you were teaching, and different things like that. 2,400 responses again. Do you believe a majority of students will be able to maintain social distancing and hygiene policies? 82% said no, flat out no. I think we can all agree with that without having to take this survey. 2,400 responses. Do you believe your school has the capacity to restrict class size and increase social distance? 76% again said no. One of the task force recommendations was to just consider the CDC guidelines, which I have right here. Should any plan to reopen our schools adopt CDC guidance or simply consider scientific and medical advice? 74% said they should follow scientific and medical advice. 14% say we should simply use scientific and medical advice if it works in our district. That's pretty astounding that most people believe we do need to follow the health, experts in the science on this. Hybrid instruction plans, so combining that in-person and the remote instruction represents major transformation to student learning environment. So, 65% strongly agree that it's going to change, obviously, how we work and the working conditions and all that. These are things we knew, but to get another survey out and to have it validated that this is truly what's still going on in the minds of our educators is important. And then 94% of educators said students and staff should be provided with PPE as part of any reopening plan. So we're going to be using this data depending on what the task force comes out with and what they say. I've gone through all the CDC recommendations. I've gone through the American Association of Pediatrics recommendations. And as soon as the governor comes out with something, we're going to look at it and see how they, what he's going to do. Hopefully we don't end up in a situation like Florida where they're mandating the schools reopen as opposed to letting the districts decide. That of course can be taken 2 ways. It can be, are they letting the districts decide because of local control, or are they letting the districts decide because they don't want any responsibility for something that could happen? So we'll see what comes out of that. But tonight we have Brian Hawkins with us, who is our GR director. He's going to talk a little bit about, this was probably the most, I don't know, I haven't been involved that long in the politics of the state. Brian's been involved way longer, but I think this is probably the most unusual. There's Lisa's dog again. I think this has been the most unusual session ever that at least I can remember. So there was a couple bills that went through that basically covered everything under the sun. I think you could say that in a sense, Brian, but I'm going to let him talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the state. And then I'll go back through the chat and we'll do some questions and things like we always do. So there you go, Brian.
Great. Thanks, Megan. So yeah, in case you didn't know, the legislature actually did something in the midst of this pandemic. It certainly was a strange year. We basically had the legislature out of commission for about 3 months, and that sort of left some of a vacuum while we've been under these emergency orders. And even now that they had come back, there's still going to be this lingering tension between the sort of balance of power between the governor and the legislature, because the governor's spending money unilaterally, basically from some of the federal money that Megan talked about that came in, and that really ought to be, a lot of that appropriating ought to be in the hands of the legislature. So I think that's a legal battle that's going to continue to play out. And then you had all sorts of strange things like the House meeting at the Whittemore Center at UNH. And you just saw this hockey arena full of reps in masks, some of them who didn't have masks, and they put them up in their own non-mask section up in the bleachers to keep them away from everybody else. But they did figure out how to piece it together. And thankfully, despite the House, you may have read about not being able to extend some of their deadlines and their rules. The Senate was able to take a lot of the legislation that was still out there and basically create a series of omnibus bills that covered different topics. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those tonight. They were able to, and we worked closely with the leadership there to be able to try and really address some of the priorities that we went into the session pre-pandemic with, and then also some of the issues that came up because of the pandemic. So the first sort of section I'll talk about is the Senate put together an education omnibus bill. And this piece of legislation did a series of things. And this will all be going out later this week in the Insider and Legislative Update. So don't feel like you need to, if you want to keep track of all this stuff, don't feel like you need to take notes because it'll all be in there. One of the first, I started about with NEA New Hampshire a little over a year ago. And one of the first issues that came forward was the message that educators were being subject to violent acts from students. And this was pervasive throughout school districts. And so NEA New Hampshire requested a study be done. And there was a bill that came out of that study committee that we worked very closely with to try and really better prevent some of these acts of violence from happening, but even more so because that's such a big issue, how do we best protect educators knowing that that is going to be, that is a reality in schools? And so the bill, so in House Bill 1558, so 1558, it's it's an extremely large bill. But in the bill, there is our piece of legislation that talks about protecting educators against violence. So the first thing it does is it requires, some of you may be involved with your joint loss management committees at your school or your safety committees. So it changes the law so that it requires that those safety plans and protocols include protocols for when an educator is being assaulted in a school by a student. And it also mandates that that committee provide adequate communication and training about what those protocols are. Because one of the things we heard from some educators was that even though there might be certain protocols or plans around things, we don't necessarily hear about them. And so it asks that they, just like they have a safety plan for, if there was an active shooter in the building, they need to, or if there was a fire in the building, they need to have a plan and a protocol for when there is a member of the staff who's being assaulted by a student. The next thing it does is, we heard through the study and through some of the surveys that we put out to members that management in schools were expecting that, well, if someone was injured as a result of being assaulted by a student, that is just sort of part of the job. And we're being actively discouraged from making a report about that. And so we put in to the labor law under the Department of Labor, which also manages labor conditions for schools, that protective language that staff cannot be discouraged from reporting those incidences. And if they're found to have done that, the school can be fined. It can also trigger an investigation by the Department of Labor. So with respect to these injuries happening, this doesn't even include the Department of Education. This is the Department of Labor that would come in. And a lot of this came out of a very comprehensive investigation that the group out in Keene had done from the Department of Labor. And so we worked very closely with the DOL to craft some of this language to make sure that employees felt like they had a statement from the legislature and the law that said, you should not be discouraged from reporting these incidences. And if you do, it's something that has some teeth to it as well. Finally, the other piece was the reporting. We clarified that any assault in the Safe School Zones law, any assault on an educator needed to be reported to the Department of Education, and that a process needed to be established for addressing those school districts who weren't reporting. If we're going to get further resources put to schools, we need to have accurate data. And that was one of the things that the study committee determined was, we're looking at data for violent acts in schools, and you had a series of zeros across the board in some districts where there were the things were happening, but you'd have maybe a small school district who was actually doing the necessary reporting, and then a much larger school district which had a much smaller number of incidences, and that they weren't doing their job. And so this was something they experienced in Keene. And so this both clarifies that these incidences need to be reported. And in addition to that, the DOE, the Department of Education, can establish a series of rules that allow them to enforce that on school districts if they're not doing their reporting. So that's sort of the main components of the violence legislation or anti-violence legislation. House Bill 1558 probably does about 30 other things, but I'll try and go through a few of these quickly, and then some of the other highlights, and then we save time for questions. 1558 also makes changes around the statutes and rules for suspension and expulsion of public school students. It fixes some of the full day K kindergarten funding, because there were some school districts who were late to the game and aren't going to get their full adequacy money for that. Also requires the Department of Education and Department of Labor to come together to establish more consistent guidance around the issue of restraints in schools, because there's been a whole series of confusion over that. One school district treats it different from another school district, depending mainly on what their attorneys are telling them, not what's best and safest for the student and for the educator. It also makes changes around the law when a student is going to change school districts as a result of manifest educational hardship. It increases the amount of And then for financially for school districts, it increases the amount that a school district can carry over in their general funds to the next year. This is when school districts were getting held up from having their town meetings, and they were going to need to spend into the next fiscal year, but they didn't want to have to return money, surplus money that was left over. They wanted to be able to carry that into the next year. It also requires that school districts be supported in using the multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSSB, and then that be part of the characteristics involved with the system of care for children's mental health. And then finally, it also requires the Department of Education to conduct criminal record checks for school bus drivers. So that's all in one bill, and that's not, it also has all sorts of things about tax credits and things like that. But so that was probably about 25, 30 bills that they all put into this one education omnibus bill. There was another bill that had to do with veterans benefits and education credits for permanently disabled children of veterans. That was another piece of higher education related funding. Then folks probably remember the Learn Everywhere initiative. So this was something that Commissioner Edelblut was pushing earlier in the year. The legislature halted it. We went to Senator Jean Deach and had a bill sponsored that would try to seek a compromise. It would say the educator and the school district are the ones who maintain control over what these extended learning opportunities look like, and whether credits are assigned. But the state Department of Education and the state board could take care of the administrative work of having, searching for the different extended learning opportunity programs, and for basically creating a pre-approved list of vendors that schools could choose from. So it would make it easier for some smaller districts who might have a difficult time with the administration end of things. The charter grant. A lot of people probably heard about the charter grant, the $36 million Betsy DeVos grant that she and Commissioner Edelblut tried to bring into New Hampshire to double New Hampshire's number of charter schools. So the legislature turned that back several times. There was a bill filed. And I mentioned there were a lot of bills that got jammed into some of these omnibus bills. There was a lot of bills that just had to be left behind. And this was one of those things that fortunately was left behind because they just ran out of time. There was a bill to try and accept that money put in by Senator Jeb Bradley, but fortunately that was not taken up and not moved forward because that really would have created a huge unknown drain on the Education Trust Fund that taxpayers and ultimately public schools would have had to foot the bill for, whether it's because none of that money that we were going to receive in grants actually went toward the operations for the school. It only went for setting them up. So labor. There was a large omnibus bill, House Bill 1494, and this was a sort of pro-worker omnibus bill that did several things. It established an Occupational Safety Advisory Board to basically make us an OSHA compliant state, which we are not for public employees. It would have eliminated the offset for workers' comp benefits if you are the surviving spouse and you're receiving a death benefit from your partner's retirement. It also would restore the ability of public sector employees in New Hampshire to form a union when a majority of those workers sign an authorization card. And it would have provided a death benefit for municipal and state public works employees. Sadly, because of some of those issues, especially around union organizing, the governor is probably going to veto this bill. But I think that goes to what we're going to talk about near the end, which is elections matter, elections have consequences, and we continue to have people in the legislature who are going to be against these things. We're never going to get them through. Couple things I'll close with. There's a whole lot more in here that you'll be able to read through, but in the interest of time, I'll kind of skip over some of it. Voting. We're all concerned about what it's going to look like going back to school in the fall. If we're going back to school in the fall, we're also going to have an election, and we want to be safe for people who want to go vote, who we need to go vote. And so while there are some greater measures that us and others push for, like all mail-in ballots, things like that, what they ended up reaching a compromise on in the legislature was basically, if you are concerned at all about COVID-19, they're going to add that as an excuse for requesting an absentee ballot. Originally, the Secretary of State said, well, you can just check that you have a disability and that'll be fine. But I think we all know people who they follow the rules when they're looking at a form and they're going to request an absentee ballot. And they're going to say, I don't have a disability. I'm either going to go vote or I'm too afraid to go vote. So I'm not going to go. So this actually places for both absentee registration, if you're not registered to vote yet, and absentee voting, receiving a ballot. There will be a special checkbox on the form now that we're going to make sure everybody has access to request a ballot for both the state primary in September and the general election in November. And so we're urging and hopeful that the governor will sign it. He seems to indicate that he will. It's pretty common sense legislation when you're talking about being still in the first wave or maybe in the second wave of a pandemic. I'll close with the what we're sort of looking at for the rest of this year before the election. The first is, and Megan's talked a little bit about this on some of the previous Tuttle talks, is when we went to remote learning in March, the State Board of Education issued an emergency rule to be able to accommodate, going to remote learning and being compliant with state rules, that you could offer an adequate education under remote instruction. So that rule is set to expire in the end of August, I think. And that, so the department is going through the regular rules process in which they're proposing a permanent rule around remote instruction. Now, it's not just, as we read it, it's not just you can go to remote learning if there's a pandemic. This would have a permanent addition of remote instruction, and it seems to read that this wouldn't be up to whether the school district is going to go all remote or all in person. This would leave it up to the individual parents and students as to whether they are taught remotely or not. So there are all kinds of concerns with that. And there's going to be a public hearing on this rule change before the State Board of Education. There's going to be a remote method to listen in as well as to testify and to submit written legislation. So please look out for that over the next couple of weeks. There's gonna, again, this is gonna be the August 11th state board meeting. And there's gonna be a period of time in the days after that, that testimony can also be submitted. So we'll be putting out something that gives an explanation of everything that the initial proposal means, and then, you know, what you can do to affect that. And then some of you may know that there's an education funding commission that's out there. It's a commission that was created in the state budget to look at how we fund education in New Hampshire and hopefully come up with some real proposals as to how we can do a better job of that. It's a commission that's made up of some legislators, but a lot of members of the public and school leaders in various capacities. Right now, and if you've checked your email lately, there is a survey out there that the commission is working with the Carsey Institute and UNH, specifically designed for educators and how they see education funding, you know, sort of on the front lines and the effects of that. So I think George has put it in the chat room. It's in your email if you're on the email list. I would strongly urge you to take that, make sure that there's going to be a lot of feedback from educators, because this is really the precursor. This is part of the precursor to when the commission is really going to start to formulate recommendations. And it's really important that we have educator voices as part of that. So please, if you haven't had a chance to take it, I think might take about 10 minutes. But the due date, the last day that it'll be active is this Friday. So take a look and try to get on there. So finally, you know, this all sets us up for an election where everything is really going to be on the ballot. Who the next governor is going to pick the next commissioner of education. The next executive council is going to confirm or not confirm whoever that is, and members of the State Board of Education, they're going to be voting on things like these rule changes I just mentioned. We had some huge gains in the legislature in terms of some increases in funding, but whatever this Education Funding Commission comes out with, it's going to take a legislature that truly believes in public education, and that's all going to be on the ballot. We're going to be working hard to make sure that you all have the resources I talked about to know how to vote safely this fall, so that you can share that with your friends and your neighbors. And also, we have a government relations committee that's working hard to vet candidates who are running for office. We're getting ready to put out a questionnaire for some of the House candidates. And we're going to need to work hard to get those people into office so that we can set ourselves up for successes next year. Because not only are we going to need to fix the education funding formula that we have right now, because of these state budget cuts, or excuse me, because of the pandemic, it's going to take a lot of work just to hold on to some of the incremental gains that we got over the last couple of years, because there's a lot of school districts out there that are counting on some bump in money next year. And I think that's a big question mark. And whoever the next legislature is going to make those decisions. Some of you might remember the former New Hampshire Speaker of the House, Bill O'Brien, who basically gutted public education, gutted your retirement system, increased your contributions, gave you a lesser benefit, and basically destroyed the social safety net in New Hampshire. He's running for the House again. And so the question we're going to face is, do we have him making those decisions about how to give resources to schools or not? Or are we going to have people who truly believe in public education? So George posted in the chat, if you haven't given yet, you can give $5, $10, $25 to our PAC. None of dues can go to support candidates, but how we raise money to be able to support some of these folks that we vet is through our PAC. So, so please give if you can. I'll be quiet, and I guess Megan, if there are questions.
Yeah, thanks. So, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, the PAC, just to remember, this isn't Republican or Democrat. This goes to any candidate that's pro-education. And so we have recommended Republicans in the past. We do work with Republicans. I just want to put that out there. This is any education-friendly candidate. You say the name Bill O'Brien, my little Frenchie here gets a little upset and she jumps up on the table because she doesn't want to hear that name anymore. But yeah, everything that, Brian was just talking about, we have enough problems in New Hampshire right now with education funding that we don't need to be worrying about Washington and what they're giving us federally, but unfortunately we still are. And so we just have to keep everything, together. This call, remember, is going to be online, so you can always go back to look at it. As Brian was talking, I did put in the chat box, there's 2 State Board of Ed meetings that are in the summer, this Thursday and August 13th. Both of those can be listened to by anybody on the phone. So I put in the agenda for this Thursday, and I also put in the packet. What you can do is if you just go to the New Hampshire Department of Education, you can read what they discuss at all their meetings. Interesting, last month's minutes haven't been posted yet. Those tend to take longer because I don't think the commissioner likes everyone seeing what's actually happening. But those are all public, and I encourage people to go listen in. The August one, we're probably going to be calling on people for some stories and things like that about remote learning, because I was on a phone call with this kind of outgrowth of the School Boards Association, and there were school board members on there who want to go all remote learning. And so this is going somewhere. I don't think this is an easy thing to just shut down. So we will be in touch to get some stories from people to put in as testimony for that. So those are definitely going to be big. Brian, a lot of the questions that were coming up, I think we were able to kind of answer through the chats.
Yeah, just looking at them.
Yeah, so that was actually really good. I was happy about that. Hold on one second. But, as Brian said, the whole summary that he has, I think it's like 5 pages that he sent today, is going to be in the Insider and the Educator. So you'll be able to see. Brian did a great job with all the committees and hearings and keeping us up to date on what's going on. It's not easy. And so he's definitely been, keeping us up to date on it. Terry, what information do you want us to put in the Educator? State board stuff? We can definitely do that. And the Insider or legislative? Yes, got it. Okay, so yes, I will be in touch, or Brian will be in touch with George to get all of that in the Insider and the Educator for the State Board of Ed meetings. I think we just need to flood them. I think it was last summer, the board, in NEA in New Hampshire Executive Board took a field trip over to the State Board of Education for one of their meetings, just to pop in and say hi. And I think they were a little, okay, Frank wasn't very happy to see everybody. He got put in his place, and so did Drew Klein for a couple of the comments, which was kind of funny. But I encourage people, go on, listen to them. This is the elected of, they were poopy, yeah. These are the people that are appointed and voted in. So it's really important that we stay on top of who's, on the State Board of Education right now, because there is a seat up for nomination. So yeah, I think we covered a lot, Brian. I don't know that there was too much for questions that we couldn't answer. Like Brian said, the elections matter. I mean, it really does. I was on a walk with a friend a couple weeks ago, and she did admit that she voted for Trump because she didn't know what she was doing at the time. We've converted her education-wise. She has a daughter going into 8th grade, so we had a long chat. We're still friends. And it, I mean, once she actually saw like what was going on, I'm gonna go. Last time was the first time she ever voted. And so just knowing that, even those little conversations you have, I mean, I joke about that she was a, Trump voter, but those little conversations that you have, they do help. the GR committee that Brian talked about, if anyone's interested in being on that, please let me know. We appoint we appoint our committees in the summer, and we accept them at the fall, the first meeting we have in the fall for the executive board. And I'm always looking for people to be part of our committees, always looking. So the GR committee is our government relations committee. And what it does is it helps to, one big thing we do is interviews. We always conduct interviews of different candidates, but you know, they're going to also be in charge of doing all our PAC fundraising for New Hampshire. They're going to be, they work with us, and Brian is the direct liaison of that committee with the staff. And what they do is they work to kind of look at policy and different things that, you know, what's our legislative agenda for the year. So, you know, if you're interested in something like that, they're the ones that help us get the letters written and the phone calls made and the emails done and all those different sorts of things. If that's something that interests you, please, please, please let me know that, you know, you want to be on that committee. We try not to make them huge, but, you know, I would rather have a small committee of very active members than a committee of, you know, people who don't want to do anything. Jan, you're going to get a chance to be on it if you want through the board. So, and yeah, somebody just put in, what about signing up high schoolers who will be of age to vote by November? And Brian said we are working with groups that are working specifically to turn out the youth vote. So that's something also. So if you're interested on the GR, we also have other committees. If you're interested on other committees, definitely reach out to me and I can always talk to you about what those are. They're in our constitution and bylaws, but we have state committees that we're always looking for, you know, fresh faces for to have all that. So I don't know. I mean, we could go on and on about what's going on in DC right now, but I think we need to focus on what's going on here. I do want to say, you know, New Hampshire, I think, has been doing an amazing job again. You really have, being on the committees that are statewide, being on the committees in your locals to look at reopening schools, advocating that you want them to open, but open safely, and really telling us what your true feelings are so that we can use those in interviews and in, you know, things like that. No updates from the Representative Assembly right now. The ballots will go out, so we don't know about the budget yet. We don't know about who's being elected or anything. I think August we'll probably know, unfortunately, this year. So the Representative Assembly, for those that aren't sure, that's like the delegate assembly that we have, but on steroids. So we were actually able, because it was virtual this year, instead of getting together with 7,000 of your closest friends voting, and then another probably 5,000 in the arena with you. We do have Lily all summer. Her term actually wouldn't end until September anyways, I think. So it's like RDA on steroids, but we were able to do it virtually this year, which is honestly pretty amazing if you think about it. We held our delegate assembly with about 100 some odd people virtually, and I was pretty excited about that. They held this with 7,000 voting delegates virtually, with speeches from all over the country. So pretty interesting. Any agreements or decisions of districts and going back what it looks like yet? The only thing I can say is what I've been hearing, and this is just all anecdotal, is that districts, I think, are pretty much saying we're going back. I don't know if it's hybrid in all the districts. I don't know if it's full day. I don't have the specifics on the districts, sadly, but I haven't heard anything statewide, and until the governor comes out with saying something, I'm not sure districts are putting anything out publicly. So you guys probably know more than I do locally about what's going on. I know that I just keep fighting to say, you know, we want to go back, but it has to be safe. We have to listen to the health experts and to the data. We need to listen to the scientists. There has to be PPE. There has to be, you know, the reality of going back has to be real. We can't just put something on paper because it looks good. We need to actually look at logistically, how will the bus routes work? How will, you know, I talked with a journalist the other day, and you know, what's going to happen if an educator gets sick and they're out for 2 months? We can't find subs as it is if somebody's out for a day, let alone 2 months. So what's the substitute situation going to look like? Are they going to, you know, pull you from somewhere else? Are they going to have people teaching who aren't certified in what they're teaching? That, I mean, it goes against everything we believe in is professionals. Yes, if you're a teacher, you can teach, but it helps to know the content, right? I mean, don't put me in a music class. I'm sorry, I know history. I don't know music. I just don't. And it's just the way it is. I mean, you wouldn't want me teaching your child music, trust me. So, you know, it's those things that we have to get out there and just make ourselves known. It's being that 800-pound gorilla again. We can't let up on it. You know, they might come out with a plan. Is it the right plan for your district? That's up to you as educators with your district to decide. There's got to be the minimum standards. We've talked about this. There has to be minimum safety standards to open across the state. But the fact that, you know, let me go back to this. So Jan just asked, put out a list of demands, school districts, and what we feel it's important to go back. CDC recommendations. I mean, if you look at the CDC recommendations, I just went through them again, you know, 3 days ago. I have them right here. You can go online and get them. These are common sense recommendations. And the task force says we only need to consider them. No, we should be following the CDC recommendations. These are what we should be following and nothing less. If your district, because you're in an area that might need to be, you know, you might need to have more than these guidelines because of where you're located, then yeah, we'll fight for that. But these should be the least, these should be the minimum standards that we're looking at. And yeah, unfortunately plans might change, right? I mean, we know that we're in a pretty good spot right now, I think, but who knows what's going to happen later. So right now, you know, the demand is your, you know, CDC guidelines. Those are what we should be following, the minimum. Now, anything above, yeah, and the Pediatric Association's position. I mean, those are things to be looking at. Everything there is really common sense if you think about it. There's a whole chart you can go through, and if you get to know, then you don't do it. Now, the other aspect of that is if we are going to remote learning, then there needs to be a lot more training. There needs to be for everybody, not just educators. And I'm not saying you guys did a horrible job. You guys did an amazing job, but you were thrown into it. So imagine what you could do if you had the proper training and in-depth training on how we could do this. Imagine what the parents could help you do if they knew what was going on. You know, one of the students on the task force said, well, you know, I should earn credit because I basically was helping all the veteran teachers learn how to do the systems or the platforms. Okay, but you know what? We did a pretty darn good job for being thrown into it. We really did. But just imagine what we could do. This is what we need to be doing now. This is what the administration should be looking at now. Admin needs to be looking at what's going to happen if we get to that second wave that's going to hit New Hampshire. What do we do then? We should be better prepared for that. And we've been saying that all along. This is nothing new. The social emotional impact is going to be, it's going to be huge, right? We know that kids coming back into school, we know that educators coming back into school have this kind of gap of social emotional learning. It's going to take a while to get back in. It's not going to be easy for everybody to just jump back into school. One of the task force said that we needed to spend, you know, 2 full weeks doing just SEL before we did anything else. I don't know. I'm not the expert in that. I also don't think that educators should be on the line or on the hook for having to diagnose every child that's coming back to school, which was another kind of guideline from the task force, another recommendation. I think they need to give us people in school who can help with that. We have guidelines for some ESP that if your district is wondering what they can do besides just online, you know, workshops or whatever, we have a lot of information that the UDs have collected, and they've done a great job with looking through what ESP could be doing. So if their job looked a little different than it did in the schools, they have other things that they can be doing and assisting with. So check in with your UNISERV directors on that, because I know that I'm just going to call out Lori Hayes because she was the one I think that gave me a list. There was a list of like 90 things that ESP could be doing in schools. So I think, you know, check in with your UD, but if you're really not sure on anything, email me and I'll get it to the right person. I have no problem. So yeah, I mean, literally we could go on and on. I know we could. I love that you guys join us every Tuesday night. Laura, you just popped up on my screen. Did you want to say anything? You're sitting there smiling at me in your picture. Maybe not.
sorry, no.
Okay.
I keep getting kicked out and have to come back in. Sorry.
Oh, okay. But you know, a lot of these things, there were some people that I was texting back or chatting back and forth with in the text box. I'm going to put you in touch with the UD because there are some things that I'm hearing that are concerning, and I want to make sure that everybody is getting protected. The biggest thing we've said all along, you know, our working conditions are our children's learning conditions, and that is even more important now. We need to keep the health of all of our educators first and foremost. We need to keep the health and safety of all our children first and foremost, because whether or not they're your biological children, they are all your children. And as a parent, I appreciate that so much more. As a teacher, it was one thing, but seeing it from the other point of view, and I think a lot of you can agree with me. So we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep doing everything we can to see what's best for New Hampshire, what's best for you in person. As always, please let me know if there's anything you need help or questions about. We'll ferret it out to the right people, and yeah, we'll see what comes up for next week's chat. We are planning to keep these going, by the way, through the fall. I think these seem to be pretty popular. They seem to be kind of fun. People seem to like them, so I think we are going to keep coming through the fall and keep doing them. So we'll see where they go. But you know, the biggest thing, we're here for you. This is what, you know, we do. This is our job. We love doing this, and we love working for you guys, with you guys. I couldn't be prouder to have you guys call you guys my members when I talk on the phone with other presidents and everything like that. I do brag about you all the time. So, you know, we're going to get through this. We are going to get through this. It's new, but it's our chance to really redefine what we want New Hampshire education to look like, and we can only go better. It's all we can do. We can just keep getting better than we already do now. So I thank you guys for everything. As always, let me know if there's anything. And I seriously think I'm going into radio after this. I think I might have my own talk show. So we'll see. I have the face for radio, I think. Okay, so let us know if you need anything. Bring your pets next week. We love to see little videos of pets as they pop up. I feel like I need to meet Lisa's dog in person now. And again, if you're interested in any of the committees, let me know. And I hope everybody has a great night. Enjoy the weather. It is so beautiful in Concord right now. I might even turn off the air tonight. I'm not even sure.